Ready Player One debuted last weekend at #1, and this is familiar ground for director Steven Spielberg, who has directed some of the most unforgettable movies of all time. But which ones stand atop the heap with both fans and critics? We'll tell you right now on Screen Junkies News. I'm Dan Murrell, back to crunch the numbers on the filmography of Steven Spielberg. Now, if you haven't seen a number crunch video before, here's a brief rundown of how I came up with this list. To see how a film was received by critics, I've taken its Metacritic score and average rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And to see what fans thought of the movie, I've taken its average audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes and the movie's IMDb score. I averaged the two critic numbers and the two audience numbers to come up with a score for each group, then averaged those two numbers to come up with a final composite score for the final rankings. Each film's number represents, as best I can measure, the opinions of both critics and audiences. Now, without further ado, let's get to the list, and don't click away after we get to #1 because we definitely have some things to talk about after all the movies have been revealed. At #10 come two films that comprise the only tie in the top 10, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Catch Me If You Can. Last Crusade is the third film in the Indiana Jones series and was also the final film for almost 20 years until Indy was revived for 2008's Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Last Crusade was nowhere to be found on the critics' top 10, but ranked 4th on the audience list, allowing it to crack the overall top 10. Now, Catch Me If You Can was ranked on both the fan and critics lists. The crime caper starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks was nominated for 2 Oscars for Best Original Score and Best Supporting Actor for Christopher Walken, and tells the true story of Frank Abagnale Jr., a con man who successfully forged millions of dollars in checks and impersonated, among other things, a Pan Am airline pilot. Okay, buckle up because it's about to get a little bumpy. At #9 is a very recent entry from Spielberg's filmography, last year's The Post, an Oscar nominee for Best Picture. The true life story of the Washington Post's struggle to print the Pentagon Papers ranked 6th on the critics' top 10, but was not on the fan top 10 list. Tom Hanks also stars in this film, along with Murrell Streep, and if you're wondering how this film made the overall top 10, stay tuned, because we have a lot to go over. Coming in at #8 is a film that was ranked on both the critics' and audience's top 10 lists, 2015's Bridge of Spies, perhaps most famous for actor Mark Rylance's surprising Oscar win over frontrunner Sylvester Stallone in Creed for Best Supporting Actor. Bridge of Spies was ranked 5th on the audience favorite list and 8th on the critics' favorites, landing it a spot on the overall top 10. At #7 is the final 21st century entry on this list, 2012's Lincoln, a film that won Daniel Day-Lewis a record 3rd Best Actor Oscar. Lincoln ranked 6th on the audience favorite list and 5th on the critics list, and if you're asking how a film could rank 5th and 6th on 2 lists but still come in 7th overall, we will cover that at the end of this video. For now, let's get into what I predict will be a less controversial part of the top 10. At #6 is my personal favorite Steven Spielberg film, 1975's Jaws, which was tied for 2nd on the critics list, but only ranked 10th on the audience list. Jaws is largely credited with creating the summer blockbuster and was the first film to ever gross $100 million at the US box office.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
It was the highest grossing movie of all time for 2 years until a little movie called Star Wars dethroned it. Adjusted for inflation, Jaws would be the 7th highest grossing film of all time in the United States, right between Dr. Zhivago and the 10 Commandments. At #5 is the other film critics ranked in 2nd place, 1977's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Audiences also showed their love for this film, ranking it 9th on their list. Close Encounters was Spielberg's 3rd film and his first after Jaws. It was also the first film for which Steven Spielberg was nominated for a Best Director Oscar. It was nominated for 8 total Academy Awards and won the Oscar for Best Cinematography. It was also one of only 2 films nominated for Best Visual Effects, but lost to its competitor, Star Wars. That's pretty tough competition. Coming in at the 4th spot is 1982's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, a movie that to this day holds the record for most overall weeks at #1 at the box office with 16 weeks total. E.T. was a phenomenon when it was released, dethroning Star Wars as the all-time box office champion and winning 4 Oscars, including a 4th Academy Award for composer John Williams. E.T. was tied for 1st on the critics list, but audiences were a little cooler on the film. It was not ranked in the audience top 10 list at all, coming in at #11. At number 3 is a film that famously did not win the Oscar for Best Picture, 1998's Saving Private Ryan. Saving Private Ryan won Steven Spielberg his second Oscar for Best Director and was heavily favored to take the top prize at the Academy Awards, but was upset in the Best Picture race by Miramax's Shakespeare in Love.
Big mystery.
This was the first pairing of Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks and the most lucrative to date. Saving Private Ryan was the highest grossing film of 1998 domestically, out-earning films like Armageddon, There's Something About Mary, and Pixar's A Bug's Life. I would also like to state unequivocally that it was heinously robbed of the Oscar that it rightfully should have earned, and that its Best Picture loss is a wound that will never truly heal for me. Moving on. The runner-up on the Spielberg Top 10 is the first in a still continuing series of adventures, 1981's Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders won 4 Oscars and was the second movie to earn Spielberg a nomination for Best Director. Now, the early 80s were a box office renaissance, not just for Spielberg, but for star Harrison Ford, who headlined the top-grossing movie for 3 of the first 5 years of the 1980s. And he could have made it 4 out of 5 if 1984's Temple of Doom hadn't been beaten out by 2 little movies called Ghostbusters and Beverly Hills Cop. At number 1 is a film that the American Film Institute has twice listed as one of the top 10 American films ever made. It is also listed on IMDb's top 10 list and ranked first on both the audience and critics lists that were compiled for this video, 1993's Schindler's List. Spielberg's powerful story of Oskar Schindler, a man credited with saving over 1,000 Jewish lives during the Holocaust, won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture and Spielberg's first Best Director Academy Award. It also earned nominations for lead actor Liam Neeson and Ralph Fiennes, whose horrifying portrayal of Amon Gaith remains an indelible cinematic portrayal of evil. Now, while there may have been endless debates about which of Spielberg's landmark films is his best, it's hard to argue that Schindler's List, a film that continues to affect moviegoers 25 years after its release, isn't his finest. So, I know what you're probably yelling at your screen right now. Where's Jurassic Park? Why isn't Minority Report on this list? Where's the Sugarland Express? Okay, you're probably not yelling that last one. The simple fact is that that's how the numbers shook out. Part of it can be attributed to big difference between the critics list and the audience list. For example, audiences included The Color Purple, Empire of the Sun, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom on their list, but omitted Minority Report, while Minority Report ranked on the critics list, but wasn't on the audience list. With so many movies battling it out, some were bound to get left out. Plus, Jurassic Park, while it was ranked separately on both the audience and critics' top 10, received overwhelming support from neither group. Fans ranked it number 7, and critics ranked it number 10. When all the numbers were averaged, Minority Report missed the overall top 10 by just 0.025 points, while Jurassic Park missed out by just 0.075 points. But it isn't just what's not on this list that I'm sure some of you are upset about. It's about what is on the list. And yes, it's hard to argue that Bridge of Spies and The Post deserve to be here over other movies that have been fan favorites for years or decades. 3 videos into this number crunching experiment, I'm noticing that there does seem to be a bias towards movies that have been released more recently. For example, of the 17 Disney movies that made the top 10 or tied for a spot when I did that video, 6 are 21st century releases, and 6 of the last 7 Disney animated releases overall. All of the movies that made the top 10 comic book list were made post-2000, and 7 out of the 11 films were made since 2012. And on this very Spielberg list, 4 out of the 11 movies were made after the year 2000, with 3 of the final movies made since 2012. Of the 3 lists I've done so far in these number crunch shows, the average year of a film on the critics' top 10 is 1991, while the average year on the fans' top 10 is 1999. And keep in mind, these lists cover movies that were released over many different decades, so it does seem that fans favor recent releases marginally more even than critics. So maybe it's time to come up with some kind of offsetting number to put more recent releases on an even playing field. But it'll take someone a lot smarter than me to come up with a method like that. Are you someone who's a lot smarter than me? Do you have a way to offset what seems like a bias towards more recent movies? Let us know in the comments below, or tweet us at SJ News or me at Murrell Dan and let us know. I think these number crunch videos are going to need a bigger boat. Until next time, I'm Dan Murrell.